Expo. Welcome to the Terminology Leadings Practice stream of the 2024 SNOMED CT Expo. And big thank you to B2I for sponsoring this stream. I know most of you in this room, but hello, I'm Susie Roy. I am the Collaborations and Research Engagement Specialist here at SNOMED International, and I'll be moderating today's session. As always, all questions will be answered at the conclusion of the presentation. And those that are online, thank you also for joining. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to type your questions to the presenter. And online attendees, I have a microphone up here that I will pass along for any questions that you may have. I am now very pleased to introduce my colleague, Rob Hausam from Hausam Consulting, who will present SNOMED CT, the FHIR terminology ecosystem and implementation, a useful synergy. Rob, please.
Thanks, Susie. Let's see. Get the slides to move here. So I'm glad to be here to present this material this afternoon, and glad that you are here. Yeah, made it here. Susie said after the for the final session after lunch on the last day. So glad that you're here, and we're going to cover slide for the learning objectives. We're going to try to we'll talk about the FHIR terminology ecosystem. There's some new capabilities that we've introduced into the FHIR terminology service world recently, and particularly how that can be used in support of SNOMED CT. And we'll focus that on the synergy with implementations, and particularly implementations of the IPS. And we'll be just understanding how those capabilities can work together. I'm actually not going to, IPS is one of my real passions. I've been working on it for a while, but I'm going to leave most of the details of that to Susie and Alejandro on their final presentation. So we'll be focusing mostly on the FHIR aspects right now. I'm making a guess that probably everyone here's heard of FHIR, and we call it FHIR. But it's the acronym that stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. It's the newest general data representation and particularly data exchange specification from HL7, Health Level 7 International. And this photo there is of the current available FHIR version, front page basically of the spec. We're not going to be able to go into a lot of detail on that. I'm assuming that, again, you either have some knowledge or you will, point you to some places to get that. But we will talk, again, specifically, we'll go ahead and get into the terminology aspects. And if I can get the slide to move. Why is it not working? There we go. Okay. So, but we will, a little bit of an overview before we do that, and basically about FHIR itself, just a one slide. Again, it stands for Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. And I'll maybe break that down just a little bit, but FAST is the idea that we're trying to be able to provide a specification that can be used in the real world and implemented in as efficiently as possible and faster than a lot of what we've had in the past. We're trying to put things together into essentially not only just a specification, but really an ecosystem, including tooling and all that, to facilitate implementations and make them, just make it easier for us to get to the semantic interoperability that we're all looking for, and be able to do some practical things with healthcare data as rapidly and as reasonably as possible. So it's a free and open healthcare data API that HL7 is publishing. It kind of builds on top of some of what you might consider the simplicity of the HL7 version 2 specification, the old text pipe delimited format that's in wide use in many places. It certainly is in the US, and it's used widely still very much around the world. It's been around for what is it, 40 years now probably, or something like that. But it had a virtue of being relatively simple, and FHIR kind of takes, builds on top of that, but it's doing so with moving into the use of modern standards, standards of the web that we're used to whenever we go to, you know, Google and all their other modern web applications. FHIR is leveraging that with XML and JSON and HTTP and REST API and UML, things that are very familiar to a new generation of developers. Again, in order to help improve that implementation, that's, FHIR has moved to that. And the idea is to make it easy to implement the basics and have that to be a standard foundation. And then for the things that are maybe beyond the basics, we also have a means of doing that in the use of extensions and other things that can still facilitate the richness and complexity that we know exist in healthcare data. But FHIR's getting really rather quite rapid take up. It's being deployed and used widely around the world now. And the bottom here, we have the link to the latest FHIR release, which you saw in that earlier screenshot. And so you can go find the FHIR specification there if you want to follow that link. So, okay. So got to point to the right place here. So we'll since we're here at a terminology meeting around SNOMED, we'll focus, like I said, mainly on terminology aspects. And so FHIR's role with terminology, basically there's, we'll get into the details, but if you want to find, at a nutshell, what's available, you can do it on this page. Basically the FHIR terminology module, sort of the one-stop shop that you can go to find everything that, pretty much at a glance that FHIR talks about regarding terminology. And so you have the link up there, but that's the module here and prominent part of the specification. And then the page over here is basically what you'll see when you get there. You can have information on the FHIR terminology related resources and the FHIR terminology service. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And the operations that are included with around all of that with the terminology service and the operations on the FHIR resources, and then also some information on very coded data types that are used in FHIR for transmitting the coded data that we're all interested in, and then some other documentation links that you can look at. So I'd recommend going there to get further details. And there's one other place that I want to point out in the FHIR specification. If you're wanting to get into more of the content and what FHIR specifies in regard to specific terminologies and use, then you can follow this helpful link right at the top of basically every page in the FHIR specification. You see terminologies, and once you click into that, then you get into a lot of useful specific information. You'll get immediately to this page around the code systems, and if you can, I don't know how well this is visible out there. It's probably pretty small, but basically you got information on how to use codes and some other things. And you got tabs for code systems and value sets and concept maps and other things that are going to be of interest. And you get into the specific details of those, and particularly I highlighted the page on SNOMED CT. Using SNOMED CT with HL7 standards page is accessible from that, and it gives more details about exactly how you can leverage the capabilities of SNOMED CT, within in a FHIR specification or a FHIR data, FHIR instance. And so that's again trying to figure out how we can leverage marry those two capabilities together. That's a place to go to, at least to start to look into that. So the key thing that FHIR really provides that's probably beyond what we've seen in their earlier HL7 specifications and most other healthcare specifications out there, is the idea of the terminology service. And so FHIR, right from the start, basically wanted to emphasize, that we need to provide tools that will allow developers and their applications to be able to make effective use of terminology in a way that's, hopefully is accessible much more so than we've had in the past. So we have the FHIR terminology service, and it's basically, says there, it's an API that provides critical capabilities and infrastructure, and in order to support effective and efficient use of clinical terminology in FHIR applications and systems. And you can go to the link there, and essentially, again, it says, provides support for the provision of the terminology service, and that's a service that lets healthcare applications make the use of codes and value sets without having to become experts. You don't need to know about all the fine details of everything about what is a code system and a value set and concept mapping, the resource details, and also even more so maybe the underlying complexity of something like SNOMED CT or other code systems, and all the fundamental terminological principles. The idea of the terminology services, that people have worked on that and have put this all into the specification, and making it relatively accessible through an API that you can leverage in your applications without, and again, kind of emphasizing that fast in FHIR, it lets you do terminology a lot faster. So that's the basic idea. Manages most of the complexity, so the implementers and applications don't really have to do that. And this screenshot down here basically shows all the different terminology service operations that are available. And again, we won't have time to go into what the details of all those are in this talk, but you can look into that and find out more about it and ask for help if you need that. So let's see. So I want to talk now about the terminology ecosystem. That's a new term that we've kind of just recently introduced as of January of this year. This sort of new capability came about and is starting to be documented and starting to be offered. It's focused primarily, at least right now, on FHIR publishing, which would be building, FHIR implementation guides, profiles, and around in the workflow and tooling around that. Prior to the FHIR ecosystem, basically all of the FHIR implementation guide publishing has been dependent on a specific HL7 international hosted terminology server, which is known, I think, to many of us who've probably seen, but tx.phir.org. I don't know if I can point to it there, but it's a specific server that's been hosted for FHIR publishing, and it's basically the only place that you've been able to go to get content, including SNOMED and LOINC and HL7 terminologies and many other things, all in that one server. But there's some limitations with that, particularly the tx.phir.org server and its code. If you use it to set up additional server instances, it doesn't yet, at least, support for SNOMED. It doesn't support ECL, and I think we've seen with many of the talks, earlier today and yesterday and all this week about the power that ECL can provide, and we'll hear more about that as Susie and Alejandro give their presentation as well. But anyway, it doesn't support that. So, and it also has a sort of an ad hoc kind of a maintenance and release issue, and there's a kind of a bottleneck of sometimes of getting that done because a lot of it has to come through me, and people have to tell me what they want updated and all that, because I've been kind of serving in most of that role, so that Graham Grieve doesn't have to, but a lot of it's volunteer effort, and so anyway, so what we're trying to do with the ecosystem though is to provide more robust and additional capabilities. So the components of it is that there's basically a single master registration file, so you can register a terminology server for the ecosystem. And you may also have other master files existing elsewhere, but there's the basically central one that exists at this location, so you know exactly where it is. And then once when you register a server, you can basically say what terminology you want to support and potentially what versions of that terminology as well. So you can, declare yourself as the authoritative source. Yeah, for example, we could have an instance of snowstorm it would be the authoritative source for SNOMED CT. And if that's registered in the FHIR ecosystem, then all of the implementation guides that are being published in HL7 space would be able to leverage that. And so anyway, this is some more details about, about that. Again, you don't have to be an authoritative source, but you can also just be supporting and providing that for, for your region or whatever. But, that you can decide when you do register whether you're the authoritative source or not. Most servers are only going to have one endpoint. They support one FHIR version, but it's possible to support multiple versions as well. There's also a monitoring server, and that scans the servers from the registration file, and it maintains a live list of all the servers and their configurations and the code systems and versions that they support. Then that's actually used, when you're actually doing, work on building and publishing the specifications. So clients that are interested can interrogate the monitoring server to see what does exist and where you might go get information on a particular code system. It might be a specialized code system that many servers don't support, but if you have a server registered in the ecosystem for that, then you'll be able to leverage that in your implementation guides. And, there's a possibility of using authentication in some ways, or but you're not necessarily required to do that. Okay. So why is that not working? It's not working. There we go. All right, well, so the last bit on this, there's basically the monitoring server API, where it's a public IPA with two sub-functions about discovering the list of known servers and also resolution. You can recommend what server to use for a particular code system. The client can ask which server to use. If you're looking for, if you're not sure where to get it, you can find out what server is going to be able to provide that. And it can also specify some details of usages down here, and so you could potentially restrict the use of the server in certain situations, and basically it's up to the discretion of the server owner, maintainer to declare what the proper uses are, but there's a capability for allowing you to specify that at what pretty much whatever level of detail you would think would be needed. And so again, if it says down at the bottom here, it might be appropriate if the ecosystem's not production grade, but there's some concern about how users would deal with that. So you can specify all that if you need to. All right, let's keep going. Not responding very well. Oh, it's slow, I guess. All right, so I wanted to talk now just a bit about some implications and future direction. Each organization that's responsible for creating or maintaining one or more code systems, again, may offer to be the authoritative source, as I mentioned. And that's, I already mentioned the snowstorm potentially could be what SNOMED International might use to offer for sort of the gold standard for SNOMED CT, potentially from multiple editions and versions of editions to whatever level is needed. Right now, again, that's being left up to whatever gets put onto tx.fhir.org, and we've got some of the SNOMED editions that are hosted there, and a number that are not. And sort of, it's kind of the squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of thing. If you need it, you've been having to ask for it, but SNOMED would be able to kind of take that over if they decide to do that. And in particular, the HL7 affiliates in various countries around the world have been asked to, for their own local terminologies to host their own content. And now that this ecosystem provides their ability to do that, so that if they have, particular SNOMED extensions for their country. The HL7 affiliate in that country would, ultimately, hopefully would be able to host that on a server that they have control over, and they can keep up to date and maintain as needed. And that's sort of in the medium to long term. Eventually, we'll try to move that off of the tx.fire.org server from HL7 International onto those affiliate servers. Originally, there was a suggestion that should be done by October of this year, which is where we are right now. That hasn't generally happened yet. It's going to take definitely some more time, but Australia has actually done that. They are hosting their own on their version of onto server that they support. So there's some progress in that area, and there's going to be more to come. So I think I've just got a couple more slides. I can get to them. Yeah. So I wanted to finish up by talking a little bit about the terminology ecosystem and IPS. And like I said, then more details on IPS will be coming as in the last presentation. So you'll see this slide again, and so just a little bit about IPS. It's it provides a healthcare summary for an individual point of care at a point in time. It's designed to be minimal and non-exhaustive and especially agnostic and condition independent, but with the idea of being clinically relevant. It's a specification to be simple and implementable and usable, ideally, at least by anyone, any place, at any time, with multiple beneficiaries. And so it's really, I think, an important spec, and we'll be hearing more about its use, like I said. And I'd be happy to talk with you more about it later from my perspective. So we'll move on here to. Okay. So for IPS, the SNOMED CT has been, we've recommended it as being the primary recommended terminology. It's not the only one, and it's definitely not required, because we recognize that different nations have different expectations and requirements. And SNOMED has provided the sub-ontology. Again, you're going to hear more about that, so I won't say any more about it right now. The recent ballot, we've tried to do some things to make this easier for folks implementing IPS. We've removed any specific references to any of the SNOMED CT editions, like the international edition or versions, from the value set definitions that we use in the IPS specification. And that really makes it much more free for implementers to be able to use whatever they need, including using the IPS terminology, the sub-ontology, which, again, you'll be hearing more about. And so basically, this is going to facilitate, I think, our IPS implementations and make them easier to validate. And it's, I think, combining these features of what we can do now in FHIR and with the IPS specification is just going to help to facilitate the adoption and use of IPS globally. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rob. And so we do have some time for questions, so we'll go ahead and open it up. And
thank you. Ronald Cornet, Amsterdam UMC. Thanks for the presentation, and thanks for showing us this registry index coming up. Learning every day.
Okay.
I was wondering, because then you have the index, so you can see what servers there are, and from the servers you can see what terminologies they host.
Yeah.
I think one of the, and it may be my understanding, well, the things with FHIR is that if you host a, let's say, administrative sex terminology, and I do, is there then a way to tell, other than comparing, whether your terminology or code system is the same as mine? Because they have URLs which start yours with your domain and mine with my domain. Can we tell if they're the same, or whether maybe I added some things to that?
That's a good question. I think, let me see how I would really answer that. I mean, there's a couple of things that we can do, of course. We can determine, again, about the sort of the the version and the dates and all that and say what's the most recent and all that. But as far as if we have two different defining canonical URLs, so basically we say these are both for, I think did you say administrative sex or whatever it was you said? You know, they basically are supposed to be covering the same material, but they have different URLs, then they're considered to be different terminologies. So do we have a way to directly compare them and make sure whether they're identical or not? And actually, I'm not aware that we do. Maybe we need that, but I don't know of any comprehensive way to do it other than just iterate through and see if you have
Yeah,
full matches
maybe
back.
add hashes or I don't know. And I was thinking, especially because you have the monitor, which will show whether our servers are up or down. And
Yeah.
it's great if you have fallback scenarios and can say, oh, but my server is down, but yours is running. So then we
Well,
can get that
but again,
terminology from yours.
So the main thing
yeah.
I'd say though is if you're wanting to have sort of a fallback mechanism, then you'd want to be using the same URL. So you want to be, it's defining the same code system. You might have multiple servers hosting it, but you have one in particular that you would probably designate, as I said, as the authoritative source, but then you would have others. And then Diego's got some.
I think we got
further
some
comments,
additional.
Comment on that.
Yeah.
If the code systems has the same URL, each code system has a unique URL that defines
Yeah.
itself. It's the identity. So if you have the same code system in two different servers, then this JSON file can point to any of those,
Yeah.
and you can do what you want. You can fall back. But if you have the same content or the same different codings and for the same thing, and you have two different URLs, we have no way of discovering that.
That's yeah. Diego's corroborating what I. Yeah.
And then hopefully, and then it needs to be and should be ensured that people don't, well, change the system without changing the identity. Because I
When you say change the system
yeah,
without,
yeah.
what do you mean change?
Okay, well, I think we need to further,
Yeah,
I need
yeah.
to further look into this, but so
Yeah.
thanks for the input, Diego, and yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
I think very helpful.
Thank you. That was a nice discussion. I was going to say, do we have any further questions? Yes, please, Diego.
Do you think that eventually the $validate operation will take this into account and will be able to know which server to use to validate which code system?
I think the answer to that probably is yes, probably should be yes. As far as whether it does, to what level, I don't think it probably does that now. And I'm not sure if Graham or anyone has specific plans for doing it. But I think it's a great suggestion that we should really, we definitely should take advantage of this throughout the.
I dreamed with
the
this for a
ecosystem.
long time, so.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so yeah, I think we should look at that. I guess I don't fully know how much it can, I don't know that that's been incorporated into that yet, but yeah.
Thank you.
As I said, it's fairly new, I mean, it's not too well documented yet, actually, but there were some links to documentation that you could use there in the slides, but it's definitely a work in progress, but it's a really useful step forward, I think.
All right, thank you for that. And Rob will be around if you have any further questions. So with that, I'll close this session. Online delegates, you can stay on for the next presentation, and those in the room, the doors will open up and you may feel free to stay or you may go. And other than that, thank you for attending and see you soon.